And the number of times I have raised this issue with you, I hope that you will know this motion has been brought forward in good faith, and I hope with that in mind you will keep an open mind in relation to the case that's been put forward in this motion. I bring this motion forward here tonight on behalf of the over 380 staff in local employment services and job clubs throughout our state. Many who have given up to 20 and 25 years of service to their communities, highly skilled, highly educated and with vast experience. And I'm very proud to bring forward this motion here this evening, having met with and engaged with many of those workers. And I do so as someone who believes firmly in the not-for-profit, community-based ethos of the job clubs and the local employment services. When the plan to tender out these existing LES and job club services became apparent, we were repeatedly told that this was a legal requirement due to EU procurement laws. And I presume this is an argument that will be put forward by many government TDs here this evening. Yet, the same EU directive is crystal clear in stating that no member state is obliged to contract out the provision of services that they wish to provide themselves or to organise by means other than public contracts. Legal advice sought by the ILDN from a leading law firm in Ireland confirmed this and concluded that the department is not required to tender out for these services. This legal advice was shared with you. You are aware of it. The ILDN have written to you on 3 occasions and you have yet to respond. Added to all of this is the fact that the unpublished report from the Institute for Employment Studies in England, whom you contracted to review all current public employment services and to propose a new design, were clear that a decision needed to be made on whether to use powers to reserve the award of some or all of the contracts for non-profits. And you made that decision. You were not obliged or required to. You made that decision. And even if it was the case that you were legally obliged, you were legally obliged to bring forward a public and open competition tender for these services. You were not obliged to dismantle the current model and to change it entirely. You were not obliged to move from a not-for-profit to a for-profit model. That was a decision that, again, you made. You've also repeatedly cited advice from the Controller and Auditor General. A recent letter I received from the CNAG confirmed that a different contracted service was brought to the Department's attention as not being compliant with procurement, and the Department then expanded the non-compliant procurement disclosure to the LES and to job clubs. The Institute for Employment Studies also warned that if you were to open up the market to full competition, it would clearly need to be done carefully in order to maintain the support of stakeholders and command political support. And I would ask the Minister, what stakeholders out there support what you are doing? Who are those stakeholders? And as regards commanding political support, you will know the cross-party Oireachtas Committee on Social Protection looked at all of this. We brought in those involved, including the officials from your department, and we recommended as a cross-party committee that the LES and job clubs remain in their current form. And the same report that you have based much of your new proposals on for employment services also stated that requiring financial qualifications criteria will likely make it more difficult for many existing providers to achieve a pass. And they recommended to you that you set low financial criteria thresholds and offer an advance payment to level the playing field, as they put it. You did neither. You required an annual turnover for the 4 lots that have already gone through phase 1 between 1.2 and 1.9 million for community not-for-profit organisations that have charitable status. They were locked out of phase 1 of this tender. And economist Jim Power, on looking at the first phase of the tender, concluded the proposed model is for profit, and he said that the model put forward in the first phase is not likely to prove viable for charitable non-profit companies, and that is exactly what has happened. Now, many issues have been highlighted in phase 1 of the tender, the annual turnover being one, and you were warned about this in the Institute's report over a year ago. You also said last week in the Dáil that you've done everything to ensure the importance of social value and community social linkages are reflected in the procurement process. And I would really love to know how private companies CTEC and Thuras Nua proved or showed any link to the community or to social values, and perhaps that's something you might be able to share with us. Now, we've seen what privatisation has done to employment services. We've seen it through JobPath. They've had a success rate of 7% in the last 6 years. Over 370,000 people referred, a cost to the taxpayer of €275 million for 7% of those people to be sustained in a job for 52 weeks at least. What you're doing here is a mistake. I would ask that you would look at it again. Everybody involved has asked that you would look at it again. The staff on the ground in the local employment services and the LESs are not happy. You know that, and you need to listen. There are no stakeholders on board in relation with what you're doing, and the vast majority of this House, I would say, are not on board either. So this motion is asking you to relook at this, and I would ask you to consider that. Gur Mahagat.
Thank you, Conor. Obviously, I support the motion. I think the government stance is mind-boggling. The tendering process does not make sense, and the community not-for-profit model must be preserved and not dismantled. I find it hard to understand why the government would do something like this from a community point of view, from a jobs point of view, and from a political point of view. Taking the decision to commercialise these schemes, introducing targets, quotas and commissions, which will mean that staff will have little incentive to ask what's actually best for a person coming through their doors, but will be seeking to make a profit on them. It will cause a loss of jobs, and groups such as NEWKD, South Kerry Partnership and IRD Duhallow have gathered knowledge and skills over the past 25 years and have become experts in career guidance. They've guided our communities through the crash and subsequent government austerities. Post-2008, over 2,000 people went through the doors of the South Kerry Partnership. They never said no to them. They kept their doors open when everyone else was turning them away and suggesting to them that they go to Australia. But they trained them up and brought them back into the jobs market. The government says there's nothing we can do. Translation, there's nothing we will do. The government says that they have legal advice. You've seen a copy of this legal advice. It says that the government is not obliged to tender. These schemes, such as the Rural Social Scheme, has been hugely beneficial to rural communities. It supports the essence of community work, driving buses, taking the elderly to centres, maintaining sports grounds, and the massive success of Kerry social farming. The 6-year rule will send men in South Kerry away from fulfilling life-enhancing work in their communities, giving them a sense of pride back to the dole, with nothing to do in isolated areas and with limited social interaction. So why pay them to stay at home? Why not keep them on the schemes? Admit now that it's a mistake. Who's going to do the community work in deeply rural areas when your 2017 payment structure rules are enforced? So rather than helping employers to get cheap labour and introduce a system that you know will fail, and you've heard the statistics, broaden up the schemes, top them up and commission an independent review. A 2009 report said that for every euro spent, there's quantifiable benefits of €2.89. Act now, Minister, for your own sake.
In 2014, I said to the then Minister for Social Protection, Joan Burton, that her JobPath scheme was the stuff of nightmares for the unemployed. After 300 million spent and a success rate of just 6%, I've been proven correct. I also said the same about her other madcap scheme, JobsBridge. I was right at the time when I highlighted the concerns also among the LES and the Jobs Club that they could face extinction as the type of privatisation that underlay JobPath would likely expand into their services, and here we are. Where will it end? What's next? The disability services? I say it again, this scheme is a stuff of nightmare for the unemployed. The latest tender is aimed at dismantling community-based not-for-profit services and doing away with the wealth of knowledge and expertise they have built up working with local unemployed people, addressing their issues, lending them their support, often going beyond their call to help those who private contractors look on as a cash cow, rather than people often in need of supports to re-engage in employment. The for-profit ethos should have no role in community services, but this government, and all since the PD days, have a blind faith in the market delivering for struggling communities. It doesn't, and everybody in this House should know that.
The Government's proposal to consolidate community-based local employment services into regional employment services will have a devastating impact on existing local services. In my constituency of Dublin North West, local employment services are provided by the Ballymun Job Centre, and similar services are also provided for the Dublin North West Partnership in Rosehill House in Finglas. Both have provided an immensely valuable service to the community in helping to assist people in seeking employment and in the creation of jobs and supports for small businesses. These local services provide what the services themselves would describe as walk-in, person-centred, community-based employment service. The local element of such services is very important and will be totally lost if such services are regionalised. This proposed closure of these centres will be a blow to the clients of such facilities, such as those seeking employment, the long-term unemployed, those seeking employment who are in addiction or in recovery. There will also be a great loss to the community in terms of the local knowledge and experience of those working in these local services. The present model of local employment services works well, so why change something that's not broken? Privatising these services will make such services profit-driven to the detriment of the individual seeking assistance. I don't see how an unemployed person will benefit from the proposed consolidation of these services. All the considered opinion from those who experience in local areas say that this will simply not work, and I agree with this view. Resources that are centralised would mean that local areas would lose out in direct funding. The proposed model has been rejected by stakeholders, expert organisations and the Oireachtas Committee. The model lacks transparency, is untested, and will be a result-based process that will put profit before people. Thank you.
Minister, I recently submitted a parliamentary question regarding the need to halt the tendering process of the local employment service until a proper engagement with the relevant stakeholders can develop a more suitable model. In your response, you stated that extensive consultations had taken place. However, SIP2 informed the Joint Committee on Social Protection that his engagement with your department took place on the 17th of September 2021, which was after the tendering process for the operation of the regional employment services had commenced. Your reply goes on to state that clear legal advice was obtained from the Attorney-General that the current procurement process, and I quote, is not in keeping with our procurement obligations. However, this legal advice has not been released to the Committee for examination. The Committee noted that EU Directive 2014-24 regarding public procurement states, and again I quote, it should be recalled that nothing in this directive obliges Member States to contract out or externalise the provision of services that they wish to provide themselves or to organise by means other than public contracts within the meaning of this directive. Your reply also states the new regional employment service is not a privatisation of employment services, and that your officials are striving to ensure that the new model does not create any barriers to the community and voluntary sectors or inhibit their ability to submit a tender. Yet a report commissioned by the Irish Local Development Network finds that the model used in the initial request for tender is a for-profit model, that it is not clear that this approach can meet the needs of the long-term unemployed, excludes some cohorts such as carers, lone parents and those referred from complementary programmes, and that it is not likely to provide viable for charity, not-for-profit companies. Minister, this is plainly a privatisation of this service with minimal consultation and the withholding of relevant documentation. I commend this motion, which aims to protect our local employment service from privatisation and let our communities know that they are not for sale.
Minister, Deputy Chair Karan has set out the implications of this of the proposed tendering of local employment schemes, and I commend her for bringing forward this bill. Rather than dealing with the statewide, I want to point to you to a service that you know very well, I know, the Monaghan Local Employment Service. It's a service that's been in operation since 1998. It's a service that has secured the esteem and goodwill of the wider community. More importantly, It has proven, whatever matrix or standard that you use, it has proven to be effective. When compared to operations like JobBridge and JobPath, where you hear words like disconnected and out of touch, you never hear that in respect of Monaghan Local Employment Service, because it works. It's a good service, and rather than actually putting it under threat, what we should be doing is expanding the local employment services in our county. So what I'm asking you to do here today is not just support the Sinn Féin proposal, but to implement it, to actually ensure that services like the Monaghan Local Employment Services are driven by their not-for-profit, community-led ethos, that they actually secure jobs for those people who need it, where they need it and when they need it. We have a model that absolutely works, that has been proven to work time and time again. It has operated under the auspices of Monaghan Integrated Development, probably one of the best integrated development companies in the state. It works, and I'm asking you to ensure that it continues to work. Implement the motion that's put forward here today and end this practice of creating for-profit driven elements of our unemployment services.
Stanley. Thanks, Stakeholder, and I welcome this motion here this evening before the House. What's been proposed here by the government? What's been proposed by the government here is a total privatisation of employment activation services through the JobsPath model. JobsPath, a service introduced by the Labour Party and who have stood over it for years, Labour Party Minister John Burton, has failed to provide quality employment for the vast majority of those who use it. Since 2015, 283,000 people have used JobsPath, with only 22,000 retaining employment for more than 12 months. That success rate of less than 8%, it stands at less than 8%, at a cost of $11,227 per job. That's not value for money, Minister. Research carried out by our party has exposed the terrible experiences of many people who have been forced to accept jobs totally unsuitable to their background or to the areas of work that they wish to work in. Others have been forced to give up education and part-time work for fear of losing their welfare entitlements, including substitute teachers. It's a service focused on making money, not helping people to get sustainable jobs. And in contrast to JobsPath, we want more investment in jobs clubs, in local employment services. These are not-for-profit models and are more effective. A 2018 Indicon report concluded that jobs clubs could source full-time employment positions at a cost of $2,444 per person, far better than JobsPath, over 11,000. In Laois Offaly, workers and companies respect jobs clubs such as those in Portlaoise, Burr, Tullamore and Portarlington. But these are now to be closed down and replaced by a Thatcherite profit model. A bad decision based on right-wing ideology from Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael and Labour who put in place. It's not good for workers, not good for taxpayers. And just to bring to your attention, the Public Accounts Committee will be launching a report on JobsPath on Thursday, which will underline a lot of these matters and set it out clearly what we found at committee when we brought in the department and others on this subject. Deputy Quinlivan.
Minister, I represent a constituency that has the highest number of unemployment black spots in the state. 8 out of 10 top unemployment black spots are in Limerick City. I commissioned a report recently on unemployment black spots across the state, and it is stark reading. Many people rely on the local employment services in Limerick. They have done a great job and would have done a much better job with a portion of the funding we've given annually to JobPath and its incarnations. These services are vital to many Limerick communities. They are a crucial service, particularly to those who are furthest away from the labour market. Aside from providing the necessary skills that people need to get back into the labour market, they offer hope as well. We have yet to see the external review that was conducted on behalf of the Department of Social Protection, from which the request for tender was introduced in May. You have demonstrated your intention to privatise employment services and undermine the not-for-profit ethos of the existing services. Minister, this is a mistake, and I think you know it. The government is putting profit margins before the well-being of those who have been marginalised. Limerick deserves better, as the black spots I referenced earlier are nothing new. Over 6 years, €275 million was spent, and only 7% of those on the scheme found employment for at least 1 year. Could you imagine what effect €275 million would have had if the LESs had a fraction of that money? The Minister stated that she was obliged for good governance and public procurement rules to put the local employment services contract out for tender. There is no need to take this approach. There is no requirement to approach the tender process this way. While employment services should be extended across the state, it should be done under the current LES model, which if funded will deliver better results. And in Limerick over the years, the Paul Partnership, of which I was a board member for a number of years, has done a fantastic job at LES. And Minister, I hope to God we save it.
Tully. Minister, I know a little about this subject more than most. I was in the National Executive of the Irish National Organisation of the Unemployed many, many years ago when these jobs clubs and local employment services would be put together. We were part of the team that worked around a community-based response, working with people who were unemployed to put together tailored-made training programmes to help them get back into the world of work. This is good for unemployed people and good for businesses who get workers who are, fitted and want to stay in that career path down the line. This makes sense from every perspective. But the importance of my colleague Claire Curran's motion is that this is about community working together. Let me tell you the story of our local jobs club in Buncrana. 20 years in place. In all those years, I've been a public representative, and not once have I had a complaint about that service from people who are unemployed or from businesses. It was a tremendous service that is serving our community for 20 years, a whole generation. But I can tell you, when it comes to JobsPath and your Tory right-wing privatisation model, I just couldn't tell you the amount of people in the community sector, people who were unemployed, who had a terrible experience, demeaning, dehumanising experience within that Tory model. Do you know what you sounded like there, Minister, when you were speaking earlier? Like Margaret Thatcher. The lady's not for turning. This is right-wing, anti-community politics dressed as somehow prudence. It isn't. It's anti-community. It's anti-community. You're dismantling services that work for unemployed people, for businesses and for communities. And for that reason, I say shame on you if you're not going to reverse that position.
And welcome back to action. There's a wise old saying that states, if it ain't broken, don't fix it. This is certainly not the case here. The new regional employment services are no match for the local employment services and job clubs. With over 25 years' experience under their belt, they are far better placed to service their communities than profit-driven private entities. Minister, I don't see how you can tender out services currently provided by job clubs and local employment services based on an unpublished report and incorrect reference to EU procurement contracts, based on the previous record of JobPath, which had a success rate of 6% between 2015 and 2021, costing the taxpayer €275 million. And worst of all, based on the ethos of privatisation, throwing citizens into a cauldron of box-ticking exercises, with the whole purpose of being driven by financial results and massive profits, while simultaneously taking out walk-in services, wraparound services, which disproportionately affects lone parents and people with disabilities, including those people with limited education. I have spoken with my local employment service offices. They are a tremendously hard-working group of people, providing vital walk-in and wraparound services, particularly to those on the lower employment scale. They have been cost-effective for over 25 years. The service they provide are totally person-centred and community-based. Minister, we must foster and protect the non-for-profit local employment services, not deplete them, or not replace them with an alien entity whose goals we all know will be far removed from the welfare of our local communities. We ask that the tender process be re-examined, as it is stacked on the commercial privatisation side. Local employment services are non-for-profit organisations with charitable status. Therefore, they will not be able to compete with the current austere terms and conditions, one of which is they must have a turnover of 1.2 million. This multiplies the risk, which is held individually by each manager, and therefore will threaten the existing 26 branches and exclude them from the tendering process, along with closing down 40 job clubs. It is with this in mind we are asking the Government to see the merit and true value of our local enterprise centres and services and support our PMB tonight. Last but not least, I wish to acknowledge the Trojan work of my colleague Claire Curran in preparing this PMB.
I welcome you back and I wish you well. Claire, I would like to thank you for bringing this forward this evening. It's fantastic work. Minister, this government thinks it has a Midas touch where it can turn everything into a money-making opportunity. for its friends and squeeze out a profit for issues such as homelessness, the health crisis and asylum seekers. Society is not supposed to turn monetary profit. It's supposed to support social goals like low crime rates, support the vulnerable, especially our older people, that's for another day's work, and the provision of vital community services. One such vital service is the local community employment service. They provide an excellent service on a local level and have a supportive and sympathetic approach, unlike the suspicion that the likes of the disastrous Job Path scheme encourages, a scheme which has cost close to $300 million since 2015. If only local employment services could get a similar funding. Of the almost 400,000 people referred to Job Path since July 2015, just over 26,000 found employment, which lasted for at least 52 weeks, a success rate to date of 7%. Privatisation is not working. Commodification of local employment services will not work. Sinn Féin remains strongly opposed to the government's most recent move to commercialise those seeking employment, which would put profit margins ahead of the needs of ordinary people. Private companies receiving bonuses to tick a box when someone gets a job, any job, Minister, leads to poor outcomes for job seekers. 40 job clubs will close their doors at the end of next month and 81 people will lose their jobs. This cannot be allowed to happen. You can be sure that we in Sinn Féin will continue to stand against the harmful model of private employment services that this government has put forward. Now more than ever, our employment services are not for sale and our communities aren't either. And let me just finish on this, Minister. I have a Tye, Newbridge, Kildare Town and Portarlington in County Laois in my constituency, and them job clubs will be closed.
I've met with the local employment services staff in Cork, where they've been operated by the City Partnership for over 25 years. Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael and Green Party councillors in Cork have come out supporting him. The Taoiseach has made it clear his support for them in the past. The LES provide valuable employment services for those seeking employment, including vulnerable groups, those returning to the workforce after long periods out, also carers and lone parents. So why is this government still pushing the privatisation agenda? We need a stronger community sector, not profit at all costs. Local employment services provide a vital service that help people into work in communities that desperately need those jobs and those services. There is so much more I want to say here, Minister, but what I am saying is for the local employment services in my constituency who provide valuable work for the people of Cork, this is completely wrong. And shame on Fianna Fáil and the Green Party, because this is Fine Gael's privatisation agenda, which they pushed with Irish Water, they put with bin collections, addiction services, recovery services, homeless services and local authorities. At the end of the day, Fine Gael is the privatisation party in this style, and Fianna Fáil and the Green Party are letting them get away with daylight robbery. So what I would say, Minister, it's about time they stood up and said to Fine Gael, no more privatisations of our community services.
And I welcome the opportunity to speak my colleague Claire Cran's motion to protect local employment services and protect the not-for-profit and community-based ethos of existing local employment services. The proposed model set out in the government's recent tender process is not the person-centred approach that was successfully fostered by the LES and jobs clubs. The proposed changes will only result in a process of commercialisation which leaves those who most need these services behind, and the government parties continue attempts to commercialise those seeking employment is both out of touch and utterly bizarre. This government puts profit margins above the needs of the people this service was designed to support. And I know from speaking with those involved in the day-to-day operations that your approach results in people being pushed into unsuitable short-term positions in order to tick a box or be moved from one column to another. The government tendering process risks further pricing out the LES and job clubs from the process entirely, and that would be of tremendous loss to the public. That community approach, that walk-in option available through LES and job clubs meets the needs of the community in a way that profit-focused models never can. It appears to even the most casual observers that Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael in particular are enamoured with a profit-driven business model for everything from healthcare to homelessness. So it's no surprise to see its tentacles spread into the provision of employment supports again. What isn't clear though, Minister, and what has never been adequately explained is why. Why are the government insisting on removing LES and job clubs from the picture to promote a privatised model of service provision that has no proven record for success? Minister, one thing that has become incredibly clear listening to your speech this evening is you are determined to try and fix a system that isn't broken but is crying out for real supports to reach their full potential.
Yes, Deputy Ward.
Well, I'm good, Cathaoirleach, and I just want to thank Deputy Curran for bringing forward this motion and all the hard work she's done. I also want to put on the record the commitment and hard work of the local job clubs and the local employment services. In my own constituency, we have them in Lucan, in Condalkin, in Rolla and in Bonog, and I see firsthand the dedicated work and the valuable service they provide to my community. And I spoke to stakeholders this week and I share some of their concerns. They're concerned with this new for-profit employment service that are planned and moving away for a not-for-profit model that was there. And this has Fine Gael fingerprints all over it, again resorting to the private market to provide public services. This has failed miserably in housing, in water charges, in bin collections, and will fail miserably with job activation models. And you can sum it up. You mentioned Jobs Pat. Like the Jobs Pat had 400,000 people that engaged with it, and only between 2015 and 2021, and only 26,000 of these found employment that lasted over a year at a cost of $275 million to the Exchequer. This new model will also exclude, which hasn't been mentioned, people in low-paid jobs in activating training that will allow them to upskill and then make a better life for themselves. We value the importance of not-for-profit community-based job activation programmes. But because of the changes proposed, the reality is that 40 jobs clubs could close their doors at the end of this month with 81 people who could lose their jobs. That's not job activation, Minister. Not whatsoever. My constituency is based in an unemployment and training service on the Neilstown Road, and I see the daily benefits of people accessing the not-for-profit training and job activation supports. And I'm going to put this in the record. This is not a personal attack on anybody. This is more an ideological point that's made. Fine Gael are deploying Margaret Thatcher Tory policies of attacking our communities. Successive governments have deliberately eroded community development, have deliberately attacked community resilience, and this is yet another attempt to disempower our community.
Minister, at the outset I wanted to thank all the LESs in Mayo and the staff for their hard work and for their dedication and for their experience and their knowledge of communities, and that is invaluable. Minister, you're making a mistake here. You're making the same mistake as was made when the home help services were destroyed in this country through a similar type of model that's been done now. Absolutely destroyed in cutting down into hours and in the same way the community development projects and the long-term consequences of that, you swipe them off. And we see now the consequences in many of the inner city areas and the rural areas of this happening. You're making a mistake and hiding behind the legal advice. I do not believe that the DSP is under an obligation to offer out the tender services. The services have been performed since before the European directive ever came in to practice. That is the fact of it. Contracts of indefinite period entered into prior to the enactment of the procurement directive can fall outside of it. So this is your choice. I'd have more respect if the Minister and yourselves and Fianna Fáil stood up and said, this is our decision, we are making this decision and this is why we're doing it. But stop hiding behind the legal argument, because it's been established in case law as well, in terms of this precedent for this, in terms of contracts that have fallen outside this. So you are doing this knowing what it is going to do, how it's going to destroy these communities. You need to own it.
Deputy Donnelly.
Minister, anybody who has experience of this issue does not believe that this is not a process to privatise the service. I've listened to the workers, spokespersons for the ILDN and LES managers, and we've sat at committee on many a morning and listening to them clearly outline why this will be a disaster for the community, and especially for those most at risk and those who are vulnerable. There's no doubt the people on the ground are saying they will be left behind. I'm calling on you to protect the not-for-profit and community-based ethos of community employment services, to suspend all the plans to tender out the employment services, and in their own words, because I think it's important to hear their own words. These are the people who are experienced. They've been there for 20-odd years, running these services. New models of employment services are being rolled out without any forum having been established that researches and scopes out the best model of employment services for those outside the labour market. It removes any element of choice from citizens of the service that can access, as everyone, whether on the live register or not, will be required to access public employment services only through the DSP in the first instance. The model proposed by the DSP is unsuitable for profit that has not been proven to work anywhere in the world for those who are distant from the labour market. It's not evidence-based. It hasn't been tested or piloted. It's not received the endorsement from any academic researchers, the Labour Market Advisory Council, Labour Employer Economic Forum, or the Oireachtas Committee that I sit on. Those who have commented have rejected the approach. The proposed model transfers risks from the funder to the contract holder, thus jeopardising not-for-profit community organisations, not just at the bid stage, but in its implementation. It transfers the potential future risk of substantial redundancy costs if future contracts are not secured after the initial 4-year term. I urge you at this late stage to listen to us, not just to us, but to those who have decades of experience in this area. Guramagat.
You know, I don't know what's more ridiculous, the fact that both government speakers have commended the LES, commended the job clubs, but you are dismantling them. You are getting rid of the current service that exists in the local employment services and in the job clubs, and that's a fact. You've said it was selective in relation to the reference I made to the Indicon report. Yes, the Indicon report did put forward open procurement, but where did they say the change in model? And that's the problem. The legal advice, the EU procurement laws, if all of that is correct and you're right, if you are right, that doesn't suggest a change in the model. That is the problem. You're moving from a not-for-profit to a for-profit model. You're taking these employment services out of the community, and that's a fact. So, I mean, it's ridiculous to come in and commend them while taking the services away, and people are losing their jobs and going to lose their jobs. And then also to push forward the legal advice, which the Minister spoke about for ages in her contribution. Again, so what if the legal advice is the legal advice? I don't take it and I don't accept that. But if it was, it doesn't say change the model. Why are you changing the model? You haven't told us why you're changing the model. Surely that would be the first thing you would come in and say. And it's actually a joke that the government will actually support this motion that calls for suspending the tendering when you've no at all you're not going to do that. So why support it? You know, and I must add as well, it is an absolute disgrace that there isn't a single Fianna Fáil TD in here this evening. And they're the very ones that have gone to these people in their communities, that have given them their support and come up to Dublin then and don't even have the manners or the respect for those services and those staff to actually show up here in the first place. It is incredible. Local employment services and job clubs are not against procurement. And we know that. We see it in SICAP and the tendering process that they have there. You've made reference to JobPath. In 2 or 3 years ago in the last Dáil, there was a motion passed in this Dáil to end JobPath. It wasn't just Sinn Féin talking about it. It has a 7% success rate in almost 6 years. How is that a success? 7% with 275 million of taxpayers' money. You've said that Phase 1 wasn't based on cost. If you didn't have an annual turnover of between 1.2 and 1.9 million euro, you were failed. It was a pass or a fail, and that was game over. So how was it not based on cost? Can you tell me that? You can't. Social value and community linkages. What social value and community linkages did CTEC and Thuras Nua put forward? They have none. So how did they pass that part of the procurement process? Again, you haven't been able to answer any of that. There isn't a single stakeholder in support of what has been proposed. So you can talk about all your consultations that you've had and your engagements repeatedly, and I think the Minister should have been involved directly in an awful lot more of them rather than her department officials. And I would finish by saying the committee, cross-party committee with members of Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil in our committee put forward the report with no objection, as well as members of the Green Party with no objection, that the job clubs and that the local employment services remain as they are. They could have been expanded. If there was issues there in job clubs not reaching targets, they could have been identified, highlighted and sorted out. And the model as is could have been procured, no problem, under its current model. That wasn't the decision that you chose. And you're talking rubbish in relation to legal advice and in relation to commending and complimenting the staff, which is no good to them. Over 388 staff, and they have been treated, you talked about disservice to job paths staff, they have been treated disgracefully in job clubs and LESs. So it's a huge disappointment, and I'm disappointed that you're supporting it but willing to do nothing. That's even worse.
The debate having concluded, she on Kesh, the nation of good name Tifer on Tarishkin. So the question is that the motion be agreed to. Na teachtaí atá Haefni Keiste Aberdís Tó.
Tá.
Na teachtaí atá ina Cuine Aberdís Níl. Sheelam Gwilan Keist Richard. In my opinion, the question is carried.
No. You agreed with it.